Okay, great. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Sigma 360's webinar on payment screening and AI automation. We're really excited to explore how AI automation is helping financial institutions manage rising payment volumes and also accelerate AML screening. So before we begin, I just wanted to let you know that we will be recording today's session, and throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature, and we'll address as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion at the end of the session. Now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Phil Whitman, Senior Vice President of Client and Partner Solutions at Sigma 360. Phil has extensive experience in enterprise software and strategy, specializing in building and managing strategic partnerships and client relationships as well. Also, we have Phil Neiman, Senior Account Executive and Mid-Market Leader at Sigma 360. Phil has led key sales initiatives with prominent RegTech companies, delivering specialized compliance solutions and partnerships and also strategic guidance. With that, I'll hand things over to Phil Neiman to kick things off.
Hi, everyone. Huge welcome to our webinar, Keeping Pace with Instant Payments. I'm Phil Neiman. I'm an account executive here at Sigma 360, and I spend pretty much all my time talking to financial institutions about how to make their AML processes actually work in the real world. So let's just cut straight to the chase, right? How do we deal with payment screening when the world is moving instantly, right? We live in a world of instant gratification. So let's kick things off by looking at the state of the industry. So to move to instant payment, the move to instant payments isn't coming, it's already here. And the numbers are pretty crazy, right? In a 2024 report by ACI Worldwide shows us the scale. We're looking at a 42.5% increase in payments in 2024. The total estimated value is projected to hit 575 billion, I think, by 2028. So this global growth is totally changing the game for AML. Now, think about it this way. Companies like Wise can actually deliver funds in pretty much less than 30 seconds. Now, that's amazing for the customer, but it does create a massive headache for compliance. Now, this is the new operational challenge, right? Real time, high volume payments that absolutely cannot be held up or delayed. If you hold a payment for an hour to screen it, you're pretty much failing, right? So holding a payment for an hour is not viable. Your screening has to be rapid and thorough enough to catch the actual genuine threats without disrupting your customer experience. That's why institutions need real-time transaction screening. So now let's talk about our manual review programs that are just bulking under the pressure, right? So why are those manual reviews bulking? The title of the slide says it all, right? Teams are burdened by legacy screening methods. So the traditional legacy way of doing things just can't keep up with this type of pace. And I hear these pain points from clients every single day. First off, constantly evolving regulations. Now, transactions need to be screened against constantly updating sanctions lists. So OFAC, UN, you name it, right? If you fall behind, non-compliance leads to enforcement actions, reputational damage with your clients and your partners, and it feels like chasing a speedboat on a rowboat, right? So the second piece is siloed screening tools. Now, companies have been hit with million-dollar penalties, right? Because they violated OFAC regulations for failing to integrate KYC and sanctions data during a payment screen. Now, we call that the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing type of problem. And then third, the high false positives, right? Everybody likes to talk about high false positives. That's the killer. So up to 90% of flagged transactions end up being false positives. And your analysts are pretty much drowning in noise, right? This it's causing missed true risk and analyst fatigue. And if you're a compliance officer, this is the type of thing that will keep you up at night up until 3 a.m. for some of you, right? And then also high manual workloads, right? This kind of ties into the high false positive rate as well. Analyst resources are drained by repetitive manual tasks like reviewing alerts. This leaves your team overwhelmed and less effective. Now we're basically asking really highly skilled investigators to do the work of a data entry clerk, right? And then lastly, high costs and time to implement a new solution. If you're getting into a new solution, a new traditional solution up and running, that process is pretty brutal. Some of you have done it, and right now the industry average, the costs are about $2 to $3 million, and time 6, 9, 12 months. It is a huge investment for something that oftentimes just results in the same amount of high false positive rates. But we need to dig a little deeper into why these legacy systems fail. And the problem is structural, right? So many of the core system engines currently in use really haven't been updated in the last 10, 15 years. Now, they're essentially rules-only screening engines. So this creates a few issues, right? So first off, no graph-based entity resolution. So they can't effectively link related parties or understand complex relationships. Static thresholding. So the rules are brittle. They rely on fixed static thresholds that either is generating way too much noise for you, or you're letting risks slip through. So it's an all or nothing type of approach, right? And you don't want that. Now, they also the behavioral pattern detection is also difficult. So they are transaction by transaction checkers and not risk detectors. So typically these systems can't recognize like suspicious patterns over time and across customers. No machine learning scoring. So they lack the ability to use machine learning to weigh the true risk of an alert, which is why your false positive rate is so high. And then lastly, like slow performance, right? So high volume banks, those that manage about 1 million transactions per month plus, they regularly feel that these performance limitations making a real-time screening impossible, pretty much. Now, I want to talk about latency as well. So this point is pretty crucial for instant payments, right? So with the new real-time payment rails like FedNow, SEPA Instant, PIX, banks have to screen transactions in milliseconds, not seconds anymore. So legacy systems, they typically need batch windows, manual review before posting, or deferred settlement screens, none of which actually work for instant payments. As real-time adoption grows, right? So low latency API-based screening that can process millions of transactions instantaneously, it's pretty much mandatory. And we need to be able to screen payments at the speed of light, not the speed of paper. We'll talk about poor data quality a little bit too, and basically an incomplete KYC integration. So your transaction screening is only as good as the data you actually feed into it, and often that data is poor or it's incomplete. So missing or bad data, we see things like missing date of birth, missing addresses, little understanding of the entity type, or incomplete source of funds information. And then non-standardized profiles. So customers' profiles are often non-standardized from legacy onboarding systems. And then we talked about a little earlier, system disconnects, right? So most critically, the KYC and transaction screening exist in completely separate systems. And so there's a huge disconnect here, right? The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. Now, this poor data quality directly causes pretty much more problems down the line, right? Unnecessary alerts, the inability to differentiate between a low and high risk entity, and more level 2 investigations. So modern AML threats, the ones that we worry about today, require more sophisticated detection. Your legacy solutions are a little bit blind to the network intelligence. So complex typologies, right? So AML typologies require detecting complex ownership structures like UBO relationships, links across jurisdictions, and patterns across counterparties. And then, for example, if you open a new LLC and you just screen that entity name, that new LLC is going to come up clean because Well, it's new, right? And then hidden risks. So many screening solutions are blind to critical elements like indirect associations, circular payment paths, and network level anomalies. Late detections is another problem. So this means banks can't actually identify the hidden risk until very late in the process. And sometimes the money's actually already moved. So in today's criminal network, right, everyone's connected, but your systems can't actually see the links. And finally, regulators are demanding more rigor and transparency nowadays. So there is an increase in scrutiny. Regulators increasingly require clear evidence of model logic. So why an alert was triggered, right? QA samples, documentation for sanction screening methodology, and just overall transparency for any AI-driven processes, right? And then brittle systems tend to fail audits. So institutions with these old brittle systems, they can't produce the necessary documentation, consistent audit trails, clear rationale for ruling, or just an overall defensible model for their compliance method. So this increases regulatory exposure and your overall risk. And as we say, if you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand it well enough for the regulator, right? So honestly, trying to manage the process of providing instant payments in a manual system is basically like trying to win a Formula One race with a bicycle. It's not going to work. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're hearing in the industry as well. So here at Sigma 360, we're not just guessing about these problems, right? This is well researched, but we're also speaking with leading payment firms and financial institutions across the globe, and including at major events like SIBOS. Just as a quick definition, SIBOS is short for the Swift International Banking Operations Seminar. It's like the Super Bowl for global finance. So big players in payments, banking, compliance, we come together, we talk about what's new, what's available, what can we do better. And our team actually went out there in Frankfurt in late September, and we found that multiple payment firms and financial institutions face pretty much the same type of challenges. So balancing speed, accuracy, regulatory rigor as real-time payments, or the need for real-time payments scale, right? So here's real talk from the industry, right? False positive rates are insane. We hear that over 95% of false positive rates on payment screening alerts. That is an unbelievable amount of wasted human effort. The volume itself is crushing. So institutions are dealing with 1 million plus transactions per month on average. How are you supposed to provide instant payment on that level of volume? And then also compromising safety. So to handle this volume, the teams that you have in place are being forced to cut corners. They have to focus only on like their high risk transactions, so what you consider high risk, and often dropping stuff like reviewing adverse media screening and relying only on the basic like sanctions or watch list checks. And that's a pretty massive risk, especially with high risk corridors. And lastly, global bottlenecks. So we heard that many firms have like complicated multi-region review chains. So L1, L2, L3 teams are actually scattered across different countries in different time zones. And this setup actually creates major bottlenecks and basically leads to inconsistent decisions. So let me share a quick story from our event at SIBOS this year. Like I said, we were there in late September, and I think it captures some of these struggles really well, particularly across in the cross-border payment space. So I spoke with the head of AML for a major Middle Eastern bank. They were pretty much facing these issues, but I think specifically for them, that was amplified based on the uniqueness of their operating environment, right, and being in the Middle East. So the first thing we talked about was the cross-border payment, right, high-risk jurisdictions complexity. So they were processing about 1.6 million transactions on a monthly basis. So many of these involved, high-risk countries, right? They told me that they absolutely could not rely on a quick sanction screen because obviously these transactions involving sanctions or embargoed regions. high risk correspondent banks, and MSB requiring granular detection logic. So they lacked the quality geo-risk data and localized typologies to make accurate judgments, and leading to basically inaccurate hits, right? And then another problem we talked about, which now we call the Muhammad problem, and entity resolution. So this is one of the best examples of a noise problem. So the most common name actually in the world, and definitely the Middle East, is Muhammad. Now, in the Middle East and the other areas, right, Muhammad is transliterated, it's spelled and pronounced very differently. So across Turkey, Jordan, the UAE, right, it's basically completely different names, but a machine looking at that, it looks the same. So their legacy systems would actually flag every single variation of the potential match. And that led to a massive flood of false positives that they actually had to review manually. Now, this is a classic example of garbage in, garbage out, right? Noise in and burnout, right? So, and lastly, we talked about the fragmented global teams, and this is where the L1, L2, L3 review in different countries come into play. So we, in order to save on labor costs, they had L1 teams across 3 different continents in different time zones, right? So this multi-region review chain was causing bottlenecks. It created an enormous amount of friction for them, inconsistencies, and delays for transactions that were supposed to be pretty instant. It's a classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen, right? But then in different time zones. So to wrap it up, the common challenge is pretty clear. Every firm is struggling to find ways to, well, maintain speed, accuracy, and keep up with the regulatory rigor at scale as well. So we think the solution is pretty clear, right? We need to use AI automation at an L1 stage to resolve those millions of false positives instantly. So with that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Phil, here, who will talk about the solutions in place.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for staying engaged throughout this very important webinar in a space that we see rapidly evolving with generative AI capabilities and everyone's top of mind subject, agentic AI. I'm going to focus today specifically on 2 key frameworks. One framework that helps you redefine your North Star for transaction and payment screening. That North Star needs to include certain key elements that kind of addresses the underlying thesis or hypothesis that data is truly the core of a lot of these underlying issues, and that data is absolutely essential to the successful adoption of artificial intelligence into modern transaction screening workflows. As we consider these types of capabilities heading into 2026 budget season and into taking control of our destiny and our costs and focusing our teams on higher value work than previously capable based on where technology is and where generative AI capabilities are. I'm going to speak specifically to an adoption and business case development framework that we've created that enables business leaders to take into consideration key areas that need to be brought to the table when considering rolling out generative AI or agentic capabilities within your organization. Having spoken at events in London and elsewhere, we've learned that many people are very interested in how to roll out AI. But that being said, it's very difficult to come up with very clear plans or paths to rolling it out, to managing technical integrations, to managing the operationalization of the AI, to redefining the work that your teams are going to do and re-educating your teams on its capabilities. We're going to explain how you can create business cases, develop ROI calculators, and then ultimately show a crystal clear path to that type of digital transformation in the transaction screening space. And then I'm going to focus on some specific achievable outcomes that we're seeing that in testing large volume transaction screening alert reviews that we've been able to achieve here at Sigma 360 on behalf of our customers, and in our own data testing, where inserting an agentic AI layer into your workflows can dramatically reduce the number of alerts that need to be reviewed with full trust, transparency, auditability, and explainability at the core of the underlying analysis. So first and foremost, I'm going to just speak a bit first, and Bernice, if you maybe want to pull up the framework slide first, I'm going to speak a little bit to redefining your North Star for transaction screening. A lot of the problems that Phil highlighted earlier can really fall into three specific buckets. And these are three buckets that I think everyone should take away and consider when evaluating technology, existing technology, future state technology, whether or not you're applying a Band-Aid solution with AI to an existing vendor or considering replacing legacy technology with new technology that has AI layered in. The three categories for helping to redefine your North Star really need to take into consideration data, the core screening and monitoring technology that you bring that is being deployed, and how the artificial intelligence layer weaves in and assists with managing data, is layered into the core technology and how you deploy it, and ultimately how your teams can oversee and the true North Star for AI is how do I maintain trust in the artificial intelligence layer that I'm utilizing? If we can all collectively agree here that the customer due diligence lifecycle is a spectrum, everything from pre-onboarding through ongoing client risk ratings, through ongoing KYC, through behavioral-based approaches in transaction screening and transaction monitoring, the core of this entire spectrum is the underlying data. How we conduct analysis, how we screen against these names, how we enrich the existing names with other third-party data for enhanced due diligence or investigative workflows. If we can all collectively agree that the core of this entire workflow is data, then we must realize that you need to have core technology that takes into consideration things like entity resolution, things like highly tunable matching constructs, things like the ability to segment your customers and kind of roll out different types of segmentation for different types of global deployments that can help you meet your risk appetite and your risk threshold for different types of screening workflows. You have to be able to maintain an understanding of different types of screening performed at different times against different customers. You have to understand different types of data and outcomes from different teams at different times as context in order to make smarter decisions when transaction alerts happen, in order to improve SLAs, drive efficiency, and make more intelligent decisions. And ultimately, if you're looking to deploy an AI layer on top of this, you need to have all that information available to the AI agents to interpret and make a recommendation for your teams or automate decisions entirely on a go-forward basis. With respect to the core technology, in order to successfully transform payment screening, does my system scale? We hear constantly that people are stuck in legacy batch-based processes, delta-based processes, where there are different types of operating windows and teams are subjected to multi-hour delays or downtime with respect to the scalability of these solutions. In real-time transaction screening, you must be able to support synchronous real-time returns, determining whether or not there is a risk or is not a risk, and teams need to be instantly alerted with smart routing and AI agentic decisions automatically pre-populated so that teams can focus on the real risks that matter. These are highly achievable outcomes based on modern technology stacks, and legacy providers simply bolting on agents they develop will not solve the underlying problem of scale and reliability. With the AI layer, how do I trust AI? You have to establish trust through different types of metrics, sample-based testing, and different types of metrics for business as usual to determine that the AI is both developed responsibly and ethically, and that there is no introduction of bias, and there are appropriate guide rails and frameworks in place from my true partner who is enabling these capabilities in my organization in order to be successful. If you cannot trust AI, it is a disaster from the get-go. And if your AI is not explainable, if it is not transparent, if you are not seeing the output, if you do not have control of the agents yourself and are reliant on consultants and third parties to come in and configure these things for you, you will create longer term risk that you cannot explain to regulators, that you cannot explain to your respective teams, and you will create dependencies on organizations who must do this work for you, and you will rely solely on their explanations as to how something works, and that simply is not scalable. It doesn't help you take control of your own destiny, and it creates unhealthy dependencies in your partner relationships. You need to be looking for partners who can provide you with transparency, provide you with frameworks for testing, provide you with frameworks for stress testing, provide you with constant commitments to third-party independent model validation and documentation updates. You need to be reading through different types of compliance and security policies and procedures they have and how they're building the scaffolding around the generative AI models based on the large language model providers that exist today. On an ongoing basis, you have to commit to different types of performance monitoring and metrics, whether you're determining that you want to start small with human in the loop processing, which allows your teams to automatically have to review every agentic decision before the next step in a workflow is achieved, or you've moved towards more aggressive paths to complete automation where the AI is making decisions on your behalf and your team is doing sample-based exercises in arrears to validate that the decisions that the AI is making is consistent with what a human team would be performing. If your providers or your AI partners are not able to help you with this entire development plan, then you're probably working with somebody who either doesn't have the appropriate documentation, can't deliver the types of testing metrics or achievable outcomes, or simply put, is not the appropriate person for rolling out AI successfully to establish the trust that's required in an enterprise solution. Great. So far we've talked a little bit about the types of frameworks. Again, I want to now highlight some of the key issues that we are addressing and go back to the concepts of data, core technology, and artificial intelligence. Constantly evolving regulations, constantly updating global sanctions list, ongoing, political tensions throughout the globe. All of these things point to the ability to agilely address different types of data, different types of tuning constructs, and different types of metrics and performance testing that need to be done more dynamically in a modern environment. You need to be able to work with a system that allows you to blend internal data with existing external data. You need to have trust in a vendor that has the ability to adapt quickly to different types of changes in underlying data sets. You need to also work with a vendor that is willing to check themselves and undergo third-party audits of their models, of their data, and of their ongoing performance. Doing annual independent testing is truthfully something that is becoming something of the past. Ongoing dynamic audits of the update frequencies of underlying sanctions data, politically exposed persons data, and beyond is something that is achievable in today's environment utilizing more modern technologies. With siloed screening tools, it's time to move on from having 6 different applications dealing with swivel chair approaches to different data sets, stitching together different data, and then crafting a narrative. In today's tools, we have brought together all of this data into under one hood. We have resolved it. We have put it on a graph-based database. We have applied different types of tuning constructs based on customer risk ratings and have smart suppression rule-based capabilities that drive net new alerts and can better cluster different alerts based on unfolding risk events happening in real time. And it's time to bring these into a singular unified tool instead of having to deal with historical paradigms and legacy workflows that simply take too much time in order to achieve the appropriate SLAs and outcomes. With respect to high false positives. Everyone wants to talk about false positives, but there are more modern KPIs. And when you insert an AI layer into your decision-making process, you can focus your teams on the real risk that matters with full transparency, auditability, and explainability again, in order to reshape how your teams work so that they can focus on where real human interaction, requests for information, follow through, and changes in how you do business actually matter. With respect to manual workflows, using generative AI summarization tools and pre-loaded summarizations of risk profiles and alert summaries, manual workflows where people previously had to write multiple pages of analysis or fill in fields in case management tools are things that now can be entirely automated. And your providers need to be able to provide flexibility in terms of how that information is delivered. Considerations for things such as the materiality or relevancy of different types of events, the impact of specific types of sanctions based on different types of sanctions lists, and how you react to them is different in every organization. How you expect to see information framed in case management tools for alerting and review processes is different based on different types of procedural differences in an organization or organizational capacity. And you need to work with providers who can modify generative AI summaries to meet your specific requirements. In short, there is no one-size-fits-all situation for reducing highly manual workflows, and having the appropriate partner that is willing to listen to you and adapt to you is absolutely essential in order to successfully drive generative AI summarization within your organization. With respect to high cost and time to implement. Now, everyone is on their own respective AI journeys. Adopting both generative AI and agentic AI is a significant challenge for many organizations as people self-educate simply on what AI is capable of and what is not capable of. Working with a specific team that has both deep expertise in artificial intelligence, data science, that understands the core problem related to the underlying data, that has developed core technology based on legacy practices, but has optimized it for scale and future proofing. This can only help accelerate your transformation by providing educational learnings, by providing access to resources who can understand the business case and then translate that into either agentic capabilities or generative AI summarization capabilities that can drive effective decision making and can bring it can level up your team's understanding of where AI might fit in terms of the end-to-end workflow for completing customer due diligence and for accelerating specifically things like transaction screening into the future. If your team and your partner is not willing to spend time with you to understand these things, or claims that they have a solution out of the box that simply works for everyone, you're not going to be working with someone who is going to adapt with you in the future based on possible changes. I'm going to sit here and truthfully admit to you that I don't know exactly where AI will fit into everyone's workflow because I haven't spoken to everyone. When I do speak to everyone, I will still acknowledge that there may be futuristic changes that may be achievable based in what unfolds in how AI is and is not capable of performing specific workflows. What we are committed to at Sigma is consistency in our ability to provide explainability, in our commitment to data privacy and security, and our commitment to putting in place the appropriate guardrails, the appropriate types of testing, the appropriate types of metrics that folks will need in the enterprise in order to justify both the deployment and the ongoing utilization within their organizations and teams, and ultimately can lead to unbelievable and unparalleled return on investment. And now I'm going to pivot very quickly to that return on investment. Bernice, do you mind pulling up the other slide? So what we've done and what we continue to do both internally and externally on behalf of prospective clients and existing clients is a number of exercises where we can either take existing alerts or redefine how alerts are generated utilizing our core technology. And we have deployed our agentic capabilities to reduce the overall number of alerts. So i.e., before a user even needs to step in, are we able to automate with full transparency, auditability, and explainability a singular alert end to end before someone even needs to take action? And in ongoing exercises, we're seeing with an AI agent layer, an L0 analyst essentially, evaluating an alert, looking into our deep, rich underlying risk intelligence database across not just simple components of a match, but looking into corporate registries, looking into other components of enhanced due diligence, looking into different things like phonetic spellings, transliteration, specific character deviations, to the example that Phil mentioned earlier about Muhammad, different spellings of Muhammad. With what degree of probability and certainty can an agent to determine whether or not something is likely a false positive? In these exercises of up to 50,000 names, we're seeing a 93% reduction in the number of alerts that need to be analyzed through auto closure with that complete rationalization, documentation, and beyond that exceeds what we've ever even seen in what human analysts are doing to interpret different types of match decisions in transaction screening. This can only result in reshaping how your teams do work, focusing your teams and centralizing your teams on the work that matters, providing transparency and analytics into the ongoing usage of AI, and to developing significant cost saving mechanisms insofar as these analysts, these AI analysts are always on. They will never need to sleep. They will never need time off. They will perform consistently, and you will have the metrics needed in order to confirm that they are consistently performing on your behalf. We love doing these exercises. They are extremely enlightening for the folks who are considering AI in 2026 budget cycles, and we are more than welcome to unpack these analytics further and discuss them with anyone on the call today. That being said, I think we're moving pretty quickly through today's session. Bernice, maybe I can turn it back over to you real quick.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much to Phil for sharing such amazing insights. Well, we've had some great questions come in from the audience, so let's dive into those now. Firstly, there's a question that says, how do you see the role of human analysts evolving as AI becomes more capable? And also, where can AI automation have the biggest impact in screening workflows?
Sure. That's a phenomenal question. This really comes down to the transformation of the workforce associated with transaction screening. And first and foremost, it starts with education, right? We have to get folks up to speed on what agents are capable of replicating or performing on their behalf. Our use case for our specific agents is very focused on evaluating a match, providing additional data for consideration within the agentic output, and then generating essentially a case summarization or of the potential risk and a determination as to whether or not something should be escalated, de-escalated, auto closed, or reviewed by a person. So first and foremost, I think it comes down to replacing that in the workflow, and then determining how those folks will oversee AI on an ongoing basis. What does it look like to oversee a team of analysts that simply didn't exist before or was existing only in human interpretation? How do we shift them into overseeing the AI to ensure that it is accurate on an ongoing basis and moving towards full autonomy of alert clearing based on risk-based approaches and based on regulatory requirements? And then two, what does the new AI oversight look like? Can we move towards higher value work, such as performing more dynamic tuning, better client segmentation, tighter controls around the types of cases and how cases are written internally for better auditability, for better transparency, and better throughput? And then, how do those teams train the next group of workers behind them, human workers, in order to continue the path towards harmony between AI agents and human in the loop processors who need to focus on actual human engagement, speaking to customers where issues may exist, closing out customer business where customers exist, and really focusing on the real risks that matter.
Awesome. So there's another question that came in that said, how long would it take to implement an AI transformation across the organization?
That's a great question and a tough one. Where we see a lot of progressive folks adopting AI is where they've either had their own frameworks or worked with us directly to use ours in developing business cases. I think upfront there are very clear goals for how to utilize AI. There is very clear alignment in the types of metrics and analytics and testing that is required, both before rollout as well as during rollout and on an ongoing basis. I think you're also seeing a lot of folks lean into our teams and our expertise in order to, in terms of educating their folks as well as themselves on how this can fit best. But we're also seeing folks, really ask hard questions like, how can this take over this workflow? How can I build confidence in how it takes over this workflow? And with the right partner, we're seeing transformations with folks who are willing to adapt policies and procedures quickly, willing to integrate quickly, and willing to work with us to test using our AI testing in as little as 3 months. But we understand that larger organizations may have more model risk governance, model risk oversight, and proof points that are required, and may have large global teams that they're looking to centralize and use AI in that are bigger parts of operational transformation. And those can take anywhere between 6 and 12 months. But ROI results can begin to be seen instantly through smarter case generation, through smarter agentic decisioning upfront. And you're seeing instant time savings in the throughput for alert reviews when you deploy an agent and summarization together, essentially on day one. Understanding, of course, that you have that trust established, that you have those frameworks in place, and that you have the confidence that it's making the right decisions.
That's great. Now we have time for one more question, perhaps. So this question from the audience is, other than OFAC and the UN sanctions lists, what other lists or regulations are constantly evolving and need to be taken into account by financial institutions as they screen transactions? Would the AI agent have access to these lists and knowledge of the changing regulations in order to include them in its analysis?
I think global sanctions lists are constantly evolving. I think beyond sanctions lists, which more or less are commoditized these days, I think an important element is the latter part of that question is, with AI, might I be able to explore more global lists and potential risks during the transaction screening cycle so that I'm looking not just into reactionary type lists such as sanctions lists. Sanctions lists exist because we know that there are bad guys. With more proactive screening approaches, with looking into offshore leaks databases, with looking into different types of recent designations regarding foreign terrorist organizations, with looking into unfolding geopolitical events in the Ukraine and Russia, and based on specific types of tensions with Asia Pac and other types of regions, any type of forward-looking research or analysis that might point to potential risks that can be woven into transaction screening and automated using AI that were previously not achievable because of the nature of the data, because of the time it takes to sift through those things. I think that all is coming into the forefront now. Imagine a world where with your agents having exposure to these underlying data sets, you can have all of that really rich context and a very quick summary at your fingertips as an alert is generated. And that is something that is achievable today in our system. That is something that our agents does have access to. Should you want to enable it, you don't have to. You can focus on the big four global sanctions list, you can focus on global sanctions list, but you can weave in different types of data sets to the agents with zero performance degradation in their output and what your teams are able to analyze after the fact. But that's a good question.
Yeah, just to add a point on that, I think that's the beauty of implementing a solution that can provide you with both the data, right, and the constant change in the data, and also the entity resolution piece, right, the AI, the Gen AI summarization and review of those entities.
Great, that's really awesome insight. So that's all the time we have for questions, and we're going to wrap up there. Thank you for your time today and for your attendance. We will be sharing the webinar recording to you after the session, so please keep an eye out for it in your email. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our team. We look forward to connecting with you in the future. Thank you.